Welcome to the Ohio Arts Council's Rife Gallery programming series for our current show, Black Life as Subject Matter 2. This exhibition is produced and circulated by Ebony Gallery in Dayton, Ohio. Today, we're thrilled to present artist Andrea Walker Cummings. As a brief reminder, everyone tuning in today is in listen-only mode, so go ahead and feel free to use that chat function to ask your questions. We'll be sure to get to them during the Q&A section of the hour. Live captioning is available, and you can access those by clicking on the closed caption icon and selecting Show Subtitle. Please keep in mind that because we're presenting from separate locations, there may be some variation of bandwidth. So if one of us freezes up or the sound fluctuates, thanks in advance for bearing with us. All right, thanks all. Now to you, Andrea.
Good afternoon, everybody. I really appreciate you coming to join us this afternoon. And I really want to offer a thank you to both Kat Sheridan and Amy Westman for inviting me to join this effort, not only for the effort they put into putting on this terrific exhibit at the Rife Gallery, but also asking me to come and present to you directly. This afternoon, I'm going to talk about and take you on a journey with me of my life as an artist, and I call it a stitch in time. And with this and through this journey, I hope to impart to you who I am as an artist, how I think I got to be an artist, my development, some of the tools and processes that I use when I'm creating, and lastly, how I get inspiration and how I got the inspiration to create the piece of artwork that hangs in the gallery now with the title of Say My Name. Who I am, the very basics, born in Dayton, Ohio, proud graduate of every school I've been to, Roosevelt High School here in Dayton, Ohio, and a graduate of the Ohio State University. I could have also put a picture up there of the tattoo I have on my ankle of the OSU alumni O, but I thought I'd spare you that. I've also had a 30-year technical career, mostly with the Ohio Bell and AT&T system. And then lastly, where I retired was with a company called Newfound Technologies, which we all often refer to as a group of AT&T refugees. And that's the last place I was when I retired. The other part of who I am is my family, and I'm very proud of them, not only in what I think I've created in them, but what they continue to create in me. I have 4 amazing adult children that range from private attorneys and science fiction novelists, an opera singer, makeup artist, and CEO of a nonprofit organization that helps first generation potential high school and college graduates. You also see the friendly pets of the family, and you'll also see my grandchildren. That is probably the major thing that keeps me going. Also, who I am, specifically as an artist, is a member of the African American Visual Artists Guild. And with that, I have grown from being just an associate member sitting on the sidelines, watching things happen, to become an active member. And then, of course, once you open your mouth, you get to do other roles as well in any other organization. First one was membership secretary. Then I'm part of the program development committee, who the chair of that committee happens to be sitting here in the room with me. So if you hear any other strange noises, it's not me, it's him. I'm curator of our own gallery that's here at our location at Central State's Dayton location. And now I'm also second vice president of the board of trustees of that organization. We do a lot of things in this organization. From the African American Visual Arts Guild perspective, we do several nonstop art exhibits, as you would call them. One in our own gallery, where we change out a personal individual exhibit of our members. We have another project called Exposition Through Art, which is actually our traveling exhibit that travels around for 2 years, and it always has a theme of its own. Our first one, the theme was called Right Dunbar Village, because all of the artwork that was in that exhibit came from the historic and architecturally historic district in Dayton called the Right Dunbar Village. The next exhibit we did with that traveling exhibit was called Historic African American Churches of Southwest Ohio. And while we were developing the theme for that exhibit, we all sat around and said, okay, let's do historic African American churches, but what does it mean to actually be historic? So we took a tally around the room, and we found out that 75 years of historic activity for a church would be pretty good, since that meant it would be at least older than the oldest one of us that was sitting around the table at the time. The most exciting thing that we've also been involved in, that started before we even did the gallery here, the exhibit here with the Rife Gallery, is a collaboration with the Dayton Art Institute called Black Heritage Through Visual Rhythms. And it just ended at the end of May. And that collaboration took us about 3 years to get it fully going. And it was a juried art show with prizes and having to actually be selected to be in the exhibit itself. Now, when I talk about my skills, and this is part of who I am too, I can't help but reach back and talk about the ladies that have been inspiration to me throughout my life, not only as my relatives and the people that raised me, but also where I got some of my artistic skills. The first lady you'll see on the left was my mother as a young woman, and a photographer thought she was looking particularly good that day as she was walking down the streets of downtown Dayton. He snapped a picture, then of course asked if he could keep that picture and post it, and she said yes. But as far as her talents and the skills I got from her, throughout her early life, she's been a wardrobe mistress for a wealthy family here in the Dayton, Ohio area. She did sewing for draperies and upholsteries for a company here that actually brought the items to be worked on to our home. And then throughout the years, she has also supplied us, before she became a librarian, supplied us with prom dresses and wedding gowns and all of that kind of thing, just to add to our beauty. The two ladies that you see in the middle of this screen are my great aunts, great aunt Harriet and great aunt Yvette. They happen to actually be home ec teachers back in the 1940s and the 50s. And they taught, I think they called it living skills or living arts or homemaking arts back in those days. One of them focused particularly on cooking and kitchen arts, and the other one did needlecraft. And you'll actually see a little bit later on a sample of one of the unfinished quilts that I inherited from them after they passed. And on the right, the other quilter in our family was my grandmother, Minnie Sue Gray Walker. She lived to be 103 years old. And I think even at a time when her eyesight started to fail her, she would keep something in her lap, whether it was a Bible or a piece of sewing that she was working on, making us believe that her eyesight was not as bad as we all thought it was. So when I do artwork and enter an exhibit, people always want an artist statement from me about why I do certain things, how I do certain things, what I think about my artwork. And so one of them is that I always tell people that I've done hand embroidery, applique, and quilting for a long time. Matter of fact, my mother set me up to a sewing machine when I was about the age of 7. It required a pillow in the chair I was sitting on. It required a box on the floor that then put the sewing machine pedal on so that I could reach it with my short little legs. And then we had to move the sewing machine around to make sure I could get to that. But right now, I'm really focusing on, in my artwork, since I don't have the classical training that a lot of people have, to look for opportunities to develop myself with a better understanding of color and composition, and in the process, learning more about myself as well. I always would struggle with what kinds of subjects to use for my artwork. And my mentor and also curator of the exhibit that's there at the Rife Gallery right now is Willis Bing Davis. And I said, Bing, what should I choose as subject matter to work on? And he said, well, the best thing you can always do is just concentrate on things that you know, things that you have learned about through experience or research, things that you are passionate about, and also things that might actually strike a nerve with you for one reason or another. My subject matter, as a result of all of that, ranges from lions, and I'll tell you more about that a little later, landscapes, my family, the performing arts, and subjects that are brought to my attention that actually do strike a nerve. So this is the beginning. This is the beginning of my needlework. You'll see on the left one of the simple bouquets of flowers that my mother taught me to do. You'll see up in the right-hand corner a yellow W. My maiden name is Walker, and this is actually a cloth napkin that I put the W monogram on for my mother one year. While I was busy doing that technical career that I explained to you before, a lot of the times, the only time I actually had to sit down and do needlework while I was working and raising children were those times when maybe I was sick, recovering from some illness, surgery, or even childbirth, or something else that had kind of laid me low to take me out of the workforce. But as a child, one of the other things I created was what you see below that has the pink background. That is actually a pillowcase that I embroidered when I was very small. And I had given it to my grandmother as a birthday present. And I had no idea that she still had it. I didn't even remember doing it until I went through her trunk after she had passed. So there's, there's a little memory and hint jogger for yourself. Be careful of the things that you put in your hope-sake trunk because somebody's going to go through it once you're gone. Now, the other inspiration in my life and has been ever since I was born is my sister, Yvette Walker Dalton. She too has, I would say, a piece of work in the exhibit, but it's actually 26 pieces of females named from A to Z that represent what we all looked like when we were all wearing masks on a daily basis. So I think that has been a gathering point for people to look at as well. But going back to when we were children, I think she's been an artist longer than anybody I know. And when I was little, and after I would color up all my favorite pages in my coloring books, she would draw me a picture that I could color. And I'm not so sure if she was trying to inspire me or teach me or just give me something that would get me out of her hair while she was doing what she wanted to do. And one of the things that she and I enjoy going to, no matter what our level of expertise is with the artwork that we create, we love going to those sip and paint sections that people like to enjoy. And I'm not sure if we're there more to sip or more to paint, but I think we get both of them done while we're there. And these two pictures kind of relate back to my sister as well. In, I think it was 2010 or 11, she went to South Africa to visit her daughter who lived in Johannesburg at the time. She was a teacher at the American International School there. But while there, Yvette did artwork and she did art classes with a group of ladies from the church there. When she came home, she brought some of the artwork that she had done. And the first piece you see on the left, I call it Man in the Window. and his counterpart on the other side is woman in the window. She brought man in the window home as a painting that she had done in acrylics. I looked at it and it kind of reminded me of the kinds of things she would put together for me to actually color with either colored pencils or crayons. What I decided to do was to trace it and recreate it with needle and thread. So this is kind of the start of me getting used to working with needle and thread and keeping, I think, in actually creating artwork. But I didn't really necessarily call it artwork at that time. I was just sewing as I normally do. So the first one was done from her actual artwork. The next one I recreated using my own pencil and sketch pad, but once again trying to imitate what she had done. I've had some success with those pieces of artwork because they've been acquired by other people, either by purchasing them outright or acquiring them through an art auction. So this one was the one that I decided to do that I didn't have a pattern for at all. I called it Seeing Eye to Eye, and what I you can take it for whatever you see in this picture of either two men looking at each other side to side because of the features, a man and a woman looking at each other side to side, seeing eye to eye. I actually gave a print of this to a cousin. She turned it around the other side, the other way in a landscape view. And she looked at it and she said, I'm not sure which way these go, with the faces on top of each other or right side up looking at each other face to face. I said, well, I hadn't thought of that either. So just put it up however you feel comfortable. From there, one of the things I talked about before is something that I said that I like to do landscapes. This is still relating to my sister's visit to South Africa in Johannesburg. And because she had worked with a group of women in the church where they did work study groups as well as art workshops, I was thinking about that group of women and what uh, a historic African village might look like. And this is where research comes into play. I looked through a lot of books to come up with what those villages did look like back in the 1700s and 1800s. And with a combination of what I saw in between a lot of pages, I decided to recreate what I saw as a Ugandan village at that time. And so you'll see a woman balancing a fruit basket on her head. You'll see the thatch huts in the background, and you'll see the family goat there on the roadway. And hopefully, that's a goat that was a family pet and not one that was being groomed to be eaten. But anyway, a lot of times I don't come up with names or titles for my artwork. And this is one of those. I didn't have a title for it until I actually finished and looked at it. And when I looked at it, I just thought quiet or peaceful village. So going back and doing a little bit more research, I found that in the Ugandan language, the female name Marimbi means peaceful. So that's when I called this Marimbi's village, or in translated terms, peaceful village. Ah, here we go. This is part of the inspiration and a part of the explanation of why I do lions. I loved going to the zoo when I was a little girl. I was particularly drawn to the larger animals and the lions in particular. And I would spend time, a lot of time, just in front of the lion cages. I remember one particular time where I was in front of the glass between the lion and myself. I was staring at the lion and I started to walk. Well, he started to follow me down one end and he'd follow me back, and then he'd follow me down to the other end and follow me back. And I asked my father, I said, what's going on? He said, you probably don't remember this. He said, but when you were a very, very little girl, you would ask me to tell you a story about a lion. And he said, I would make up a story for you and you'd be satisfied with that and you'd go to sleep. So that picture in the middle is my recreation of my father telling me a story about a lion. And the actual name of that piece is Tell Me a Story. And from that, I still have been captivated with lions as they exist. Now, here's where I get into either deeper artistic capability or it may be even more trouble. I went to visit my daughter in Los Angeles, and a friend of hers took us out to lunch. He had just been to a local cultural fair and had bought some handmade items very similar to the man in the woman and the woman in the woman in the window picture that I showed you earlier. And when he showed me what he bought, I said, "Oh wow, that's really interesting." So I had pictures of those two things I created on my phone, and I brought them up to look at them. And he said, "Oh wow," he said, "those are beautiful." He said, "You know what? I need a hand sewn embroidered lion. I just bought a new house that has a large entryway and a fireplace in the entryway, and it has a space above the fireplace that's empty, and it needs something to put there." And he said, "And what I'd like is a really big piece of artwork of a lion." And I said, "Oh, how big are you talking about?" He said, "Well, the space needs to be filled up with something that's probably about 36 inches by 36 inches. But of course, the lion doesn't have to be that big." And I looked at that and I went, I've never tackled anything quite that large. And and I said, "Who you really want to get to do something is you want to ask my sister to paint you a picture of a lion. She does acrylic painting and sketches in black and white and charcoal drawings, and she'd probably be a better choice for you." And he said, "No, that's not what I want." He said, "I want a hand done piece that will sit above that fireplace." And he said, "Let's call this your first foray into creating something really big." He said, "And I'll pay you for it. So you can call this your first commissioned piece of art as a professional artist." Well, I was still kind of reticent about taking on that assignment. I said, "I have no idea how long that would take for me to do anything like that. And I had no idea what I would even charge you." He said, "Well, take your time, figure out how long it would take you to do something like that, figure out how much you'd want to charge per hour for doing that." He said, "And that's what I'll pay you." So I did that. And being really a neophyte at doing something like that, I think the estimate that I came up with was probably about a third of the time that it really took me to do it. But needless to say, I kept to that estimate and I said, "This will be my learning environment." And what you see on the right is the lion that I came up with for him. And it was quite different than anything I had ever seen before, but I stuck with it. And he was quite pleased with the outcome of it. His name was actually Delano, so I have entitled this Delano's Lion. The lion that you see on the other side, I call it Cecil. And at a time, I don't know if you remember or not, but there was a big hoopla about a guy that had gone on African safari and killed one of the main pride lions in the area. And that lion's name happened to be Cecil. So when I started the recreation of Cecil, even before I started on it, I knew I would title it Cecil. So that's it. I'm going to stop boring you about lions right now. Talk about something else. This is a hand embroidered depiction of an area in the Wright Dunbar Village here in Dayton, Ohio. I talked to you previously about that as far as the traveling exhibits that my art group does. And this happened to be one corner in the Wright Dunbar Village. Of course, when I say Wright Dunbar, that means this is the area in which the Wright brothers grew up. This is also the area in which Paul Laurence Dunbar grew up. But this particular area is the corner of 4th and Horace Streets. And it just struck me really interesting with the different architecture of those houses sitting side by side and the actuality of the different colors. The first house on the right is a pale green. The house next to it is actually a lavender color with maroon colored shutters. The other house is brick, and the house on the side of it is a wooden house that is actually gray on the sides. And this particular work, along with some other work, became the impetus for what our group referred to as our traveling exhibits before, the expositions through art. So this particular piece was a piece in that exhibit, along with another one that I did about one of the churches in the area. Also, a part of that exhibit, as I referred to her before, was a house that as we passed it, my sister looked at and she said, "Boy, I'd really love to paint that house." And from those things that we saw, that was what we brought to our committee that said, okay, let's do an exhibit. Let's do a 24-month calendar to go along with this, because I'm sure we have enough artists in our group that each one could create something that would fill a calendar page. Well, I think for that first exhibit, we may have only had 15 artists, so some of us had to double up. But it worked out okay. And that became one of the things that we became known for here in the Dayton area. Matter of fact, the first exhibit we did of the Wright Dunbar Village exhibit, we only expected it to last for 2 weeks to a month, but it became so popular, people started asking for it. And as we moved from site to site, we realized that we were actually doing a 24-month traveling exhibit. The next piece is another landscape that I'd like to present to you. And I'll refer you back to the picture that I showed you of my grandmother, someone that I inherited some of my skills from. This is actually a depiction of her home outside of Danville, Kentucky. At the time, houses like this, when they were built, they a lot of them used a particular kind of siding that was really grainy. It looked like asphalt shingles in some instances, but it was quite popular at the time. Her farm was actually a tobacco farm. It started out when my grandfather and his relatives actually farmed the land themselves. But after she passed, she continued to lease the land out to other tobacco farmers in the area. And the reason this, when it's called down home, is because my father worked in a factory here in Dayton, Ohio, that created specialty and custom pipes and pipe fittings. That was back in the day where factories and a lot of buildings were not air conditioned. So every year in August, they shut down for 4 weeks. And that's when everybody got a vacation. And one of the Southern terms, I think, for a lot of people that are up north who came from Southern areas, is that when they would go back home to visit, they would often say, where we're going, it says, I'm going down home. So that's what my father always said when we would start packing up to go to Kentucky in the summertime. That particular summer, his chore was to fix the roof. And I don't know if you noticed it, but that one of those little dogs that shows up every once in a while is my dog Dexter. He was never in some of these places, but I'll just throw him in for grins and giggles. And this time I've got him sitting at the bottom of the ladder that my father is getting ready to climb down. You'll also see in the middle of the scene, you'll see a little table. And during the summers when we would go down home to Danville, Kentucky, it would be my sister's job to repaint that table. I have no idea how many times she repainted that table, but that was her job when she went. What you also see is a little blue table with a wash basin on it, and above it sits a mirror. There was no plumbing in the house. All of our water came from a well. And so when he could take advantage of good weather, my father would stand there at that table and shave out of doors. The only thing that's probably out of place in this picture is the outhouse that's at the top of the hill. And I'm not quite sure that outhouses are in a good place when they're sitting uphill from the houses and the other areas that people are going to frequent. I've more often found them downhill. The next piece you see is a combination applique and embroidery handwork. This particular piece was in our exhibit that was about the historic African American churches. And a lot of times I will assign names to pieces that I do that also have something to do with music. This particular church, the name of it is Mount Calvary Missionary Baptist Church. They took advantage of an old movie theater here in town to turn that into the church that they moved to once they left the really old historic building that they had been using quite before. There's a gospel song called I Go to the Rock. I won't attempt to sing it for you right now, but what it does is remind me of the piece of gray fabric that you see that's actually sitting in front of the church. It actually sits perpendicular to the church, but it is actually a carved piece of granite that has the church's logo on it, and the cross is actually sitting in it as well. When we talked about performances and musical performances and artistic performances, one of the things I have in my background, along with a musical background, is that I played piano for 4 years when I was in high school for ballet classes. Those particular ballet classes at the time belonged to Geraldine Blunden, who became the director and main choreographer for what has become a renowned dance company here in the Ohio area and internationally as well, called DCDC. That's Dayton Contemporary Dance Company. So I was used to growing up watching young African American girls learn and hone their skills as dancers. Later on in life, it became apparent to me just through the activity that we saw that there weren't that many African American ballet dancers in the American ballet industry. And that was really brought to mind when Misty Copeland was named one of the first principal dancers of the American Ballet Theater in New York City. It also reminded me of the young ladies that were growing up to be ballet dancers who were going to have a hard time becoming professional ballet dancers. The industry went to great lengths through the years to acquire professional dancers into their groups, but they did certain things sometimes to actually mask the fact that they were African Americans, like actually having them dance in what was either white or pink face, or only choosing very fair skinned African Americans to do the dances, even though they were just as skilled. Their whole idea was that they did not believe that African Americans had either the body type, the skin type, or even their feet formed in the exact way that they needed them to be formed to become professional dancers. So I came up with a whole term that, yeah, we can, yes, we can. And I created this scene of not only musical notes and staffs, but ballet dancers wearing toe shoes that have been replicated from actual prints of African print fabric. Also, having ballet still in my background, uh, everybody's used to a lot of ballet dancers, especially in the very classical ballet performances, of being in very pale pink tutus and skirts and ballet costumes, as well as very pink leggings or leotards and very pink shoes. I decided to fill and find a very vibrant color for the pink that I wanted to use so that it would be representative of the vibrant colors that we often see in African American fabrics and artwork. And so I named this one, Now That's Pink, as opposed to, I'm not sure what that other pink really is. So the one you see on the right, my oldest daughter was a ballet dancer all through her young life and through high school. And there was a particular dance that her instructor wanted her to do. And she was kind of standoffish and kind of reticent because it was going to require uh, a lot of hard work on her part, learning a lot more and honing in on some more critical techniques that she needed to perform this dance. And I told her if she took that challenge on, that I would have a pair of toe shoes dyed to match the costume that she was going to wear. And that costume happened to be this turquoise blue or teal blue, or even if you wish, peacock blue set of toe shoes. I had those done, and she still has those toe shoes today. And one time when we were looking at this and we were trying to come up with a title for it, she said, "You know, Mom, I think those are my favorite shoes." So that's how we came up with just calling this her favorite shoes. Ah, this go round of the traveling exhibit that we have with AVAG, we asked our artists and the program development committee members as well, who are also artists, to come up with pieces of artwork that were indicative of their journey as an artist. It might be particular about some aspect of their lives that they wanted to share with us as an artist. It could be a self portrait or something they found out about themselves, or maybe even someone who had been particularly helpful in their development as an artist. And we also asked them to include any other artistic talent that they might have. So I got real busy and thought about what I might include, and that I might include aspects of my life that refer to the musicianship, the instrumental musicianship, which was indicative of me playing piano for ballet dancers. I also had a stint at singing professionally myself. And then, of course, the needlework that I do, either via a sewing machine, which is very rare, or the hand needlework that I do. And I have a sample of that up in the corner with a partially finished lion. What's in the middle is what I call my tree of growth. And it represents my growth not only in the area of music, but also in the area of sewing. Through the years, in doing the work that I do, I've been really, really lucky with some of the fabrics that I find to create either backgrounds or include in the work that I do. And this is an example of that, being able to find fabric that included notes and musical staffs, and then fabric that actually included tools that I use when I actually sew. So this is my, I guess, entry into that traveling exhibit, and I call it Stitch to the Music, which is something I often do as I have background music playing while I'm working, or I have the television playing in the background, which gives me something to do besides just the needlework that I'm working on. One of the other things I participate in is a set of exhibits that are curated once again by Willis Bing Davis. And he creates a set of exhibits called skyscrapers. Now, ordinarily, when you hear the term skyscraper, you hear of a tall building. But in this instance, what skyscrapers means is an individual who has stood tall in our community and inspiring young people, giving back to the community, and helping other people develop not only as artists, but as individuals and persons in the community. I've been fortunate enough to be able to uh, pay tribute to some people in my past. The first being on the left, Mr. Charles Spencer, who was my high school choral director. And through the years, he has had major impact on the lives of many youngsters who became professional musicians, who became professional not only in the classical sense, but the secular sense and the modern sense, and in the funk sense. And actually, one of the people that I interviewed when I contacted some of my former classmates and former students of his, one of them actually said to me, you know what? He took us from classical to funk music. So there again became a title of one of my pieces of artwork. Included in that, you'll see him, you'll see a tie. I never seen him in class without a tie. He was always tied and suited when he came to work at school. You'll see a copy of the Roosevelt High School alma mater, and then copies of some of the other songs that we actually sang. And the musical staff and the notes on that musical staff, if you can look real closely and see it, they're actually faces of people. So those were the kids that I was in school with at the time. The other piece of artwork is also of someone I knew. Her name was Julia Raglan Green. She became the first colored woman or first colored person in the Dayton, Ohio area. And yeah, that's what we were called back then. So I don't mind using the term now. We were colored. And she was the first colored person that was hired by the juvenile justice system here in Montgomery County. She was known as the truant officer in the city, but she was more of a social worker. She did a lot of work with kids who had gotten into trouble in the justice system, either through helping them rehabilitate themselves or following them as they were on their various times of probation. She happened to live across the street from us when I was a little girl up until I was about the age of 5. What she had then across from us was very unique for our neighborhood. She had the most magnificent rose garden that anybody, I think, had ever seen. And she was well known throughout the community for her rose garden. She retired after, I think it was 57 years actually in the justice system. And so I entitled this From Juvie to Roses. And I can remember her. And actually, I had to create her picture from memory. We kept in touch with her long after we moved away from their environment, but I could find no pictures of her whatsoever at the time period. I remember her as I was growing up. Back then, they didn't require pictured ID cards for people that worked for the city or the state or in other environments, and they didn't have a picture of her. The closest I think I came to was finding a picture of her where she might have been in the Jubilee Singers because she went to Fisk University and was part of that choir there, but I couldn't find one that specifically said, this is Julia Raglan. But anyway, that was her picture. Wow. Up in the upper right-hand corner is a piece of artwork that probably got me into more things than I had planned for. And once again, this was behind the impetus of Bing Davis. We were getting ready to do the skyscraper exhibit for 2019 and 20. And he gave me a challenge. He said, Andrea, I'd like you to find me an African American woman who was active with the suffragettes at the time of, at the turn of the century and through the time of them fighting immensely for the women's vote that was ratified in 1919 and actually became law in 1920. My response to him at the time was, well, Bing, if there was a lady like that, an African American lady like that, don't you think you'd have already found her and someone had already paid tribute to her? And he said, yeah, maybe, probably. He said, but I'd like you to look and see if you can find somebody else. So I looked and I started to do some internet research and I hit pay dirt right away. And maybe it was just because of the really intense query that I put together, but I found someone's PhD thesis who had studied that time period. And what she quoted in her thesis were excerpts from the meeting minutes of the Dayton League of Women Voters. They weren't called that yet, but it was the Dayton Suffragettes. And one of those excerpts, it's actually said, And I think the date of it was July 22nd. And it said, Mrs. Higgins has been requested to organize the colored women of West Dayton to manage our information booth on Mondays. I went, wow, you can't get much better than that. So I kept researching and I found other interesting things about her as well. Because with Bing, what you're really looking for uh, are lots of instances of information that actually support your choice of a person as a skyscraper. And there was loads of information about Mrs. Higgins, and she not only instrumental in managing that booth on Mondays, but she was also instrumental with the ladies of the suffragettes as they went around and spoke at meetings of other ladies organizations throughout the city. But what that led for me was on the day we had the skyscraper exhibit, we're all asked to stand up and give a 2 or 3 minute briefing on what our artwork is all about. And from that, there was a lady that happened to be out in the audience that was active with the current League of Women Voters here in Dayton. That led to me being invited to one of their dinners called Dangerous Dames, where they pay tribute to the ladies that were part of those early suffragette activities. And they also have another dinner, what they call Dine and Dash. I was asked to speak at that Dine and Dash to talk about not only my artwork, but once again about Mrs. Higgins and my information that I had researched and learned about her. And from that, I was contacted to actually do a TEDx talk. So that's what you see down in the right-hand corner when I developed a speech called From Suffrage to Suppression. Because of what I researched and the information I found was, yes, while their suffrage activity was going on, there was also just as much voter suppression activity as well. So my charge was to leave people in the audience with some information maybe that they didn't know. So I was able to give them some background information about Mrs. Higgins, but then all of the suppression activities that were happening then, and a reminder of all of the suppression activities that still go on today. Now, Kat and Amy asked me if I would also share with you my process for artistic creation. And let me know, Kat, if I'm still doing pretty good here on timing, and so that I know how to kind of pace myself.
You're
In
at
my process,
12:48.
I'm sorry?
You're at 12:48.
Okay, very good. I start a process looking for a subject and an idea, doing sketches and mock-ups of what I think it is I'm going to design, choosing the fabrics, the threads, and the colors, and then transferring my sketches to actual fabric and background that I will actually work on. The next picture is what you see of one of those churches that I chose to act upon for the traveling exhibit for the historic African American churches. So on that day, I went out there and I actually took pictures. And then I came home and I did sketches of what it was I wanted to recreate, and chose the colors I wanted to use, the size of the piece I wanted to create, and what it was I really wanted to get over and impart to people with my artwork. One of the things I have to do when I transfer my sketches and designs to fabric is to create images of those sketches on tracing paper that I then apply heat transfer pencil to so that I can actually iron that design onto the fabric. And for this is the end result of working on St. Margaret's Episcopal Church that's here in Trotwood, Ohio. And once again, I related that to music and to the song that I really like, another gospel song, Let Us Go Into the House of the Lord. Say My Name is also a quilt. This particular piece of quilting that you see here is one of those quilts that I found that was halfway finished in the trunks of my great aunts. And it was of a desert rose pattern. And I came to believe that this quilt was actually maybe a student project that was going on because the pieces that I found had varying and different styles of stitching on it. From that, I had joined a group of women called the Moraine Quilters. Moraine is a suburb here of the Dayton area that's near the old General Motors plant. And one of our projects was to create a quilt from a quilt design called the Cathedral quilt. When I finished it, and I decided on something small, a pillow for the first iteration, when I finished it, what I completed looked like cameo brooches and cameo picture frames to me. So my next task was to figure out what kind of pictures would I put in something like that. And earlier on, I think I referred to something that strikes a nerve to do some of my creation with. And the nerve that it struck at that time and whose picture ought to go in some of those frames were the pictures of African American people who, through no fault of their own, had been killed or murdered by the police. And the one instance in particular that caught my attention was that of the young lady named Breonna Taylor, who was killed in Louisville, Kentucky. The end result of the investigation of her murder was that even though 7 officers were involved in the no-knock raid that was done on her apartment, only 3 officers were actually involved with the shooting. And when the Attorney General of Kentucky gave his review and outcome of that investigation, there was only one person found guilty. And what that officer was found guilty of was endangering the lives of the people in the apartment next door. And his name was actually mentioned more in that review than that of Ms. Taylor's. And that's what really struck a nerve with me of all of the people that had been killed through no fault of their own. And that's what I came up with, 20 pictures of people like that that came into the picture that I created, the hand-done quilt of not only embroidery, but quilting as well, called Say My Name. And perhaps some of you remember some of the individuals involved in those killings in the past. One was the 12-year-old child that was killed in Cleveland while he was playing cops and robbers in a park. And the policeman showed up without asking any questions and started shooting first. The next one are people who have been suffocated during an arrest attempt by the police. Mainly, I'm sure you all know the most, I guess I don't want to call it celebrated, but the one that we actually watched and saw being killed when the policeman kneeled on the neck of George Floyd. Another one was a man who was stopped for a minor traffic incident with a rear tail light being out, who for whatever reason chose to run for the police. And for that action, he was celebrated with being shot in the actual back. And once again, here we go, my top one, not only with Say My Name, we don't want to forget the names of these people, was a gentleman named Bothan Jean, who was sitting on his couch eating ice cream. His door was open, and who entered that door was a police officer who shot him point blank right then and there. And she had actually entered the wrong apartment. Hers was on the floor below. So I say all of this, and what struck a nerve with me was that we often forget the names of people that are involved in these horrible incidents. So in paying tribute to these people with the phrase, Say My Name, I don't ever want us to forget. And hopefully we learn from these incidents and can adjust the behavior, not only of ourselves and thought process of ourselves, but those of the police too, as they are either funded or the funds that they receive are reallocated into areas where for more training, better recruitment, and anything that will lessen the impact of the loss of these individuals. So I think that's about it that I have for today.
All right, folks, so you can see here on this last slide that Andrea has also shared with us some spaces where you can see her work. And You know, Andrea, something that really struck me, the work that you do is rooted in deep history and care. Needlework and quilting is an act of love, first and foremost. And so thinking about the fact that your piece, Say My Name, is an act of love for those we've lost in terrible, terrible ways, I think is the highest honor. You know, you can immortalize people through artwork. And I think you did a really beautiful and striking job of that with this piece. So I thank you for creating it and putting it into the world for all of us to, you know, elasticize our mind on how we live in this space and continue with this world and find ways to uplift those that need that uplifting for sure. So I'm curious, you know, there's being asked for artists to investigate the topic, the very important topic of Black life as subject matter. And clearly this is the nerve that was struck with you. When folks are coming away from viewing your work, if someone was viewing this with a friend and having conversation about the work, what is most important for you, for someone to take away, not only from your work, but from the exhibition?
Well, I'd like them to understand that even though these were individuals who lost their lives in the past, this still goes on. One of the things when I look at this piece of artwork I did is that this is a static picture in time. If I had the skill, I would love to marry this with technology that could automatically update this piece every time we lose another individual. I'd also like them to understand the circumstances, because I do lay that out in the written explanation of this, the circumstances of when some of these grave mistakes or overreaches by the police are made in taking the lives of these individuals, and hoping that this can be rectified.
Great. Well, we've had some comments that thank you so much for your work and your wonderful work. And I think we're at a really excellent stopping place. Thank you again, Andrea, for putting together such a wonderful presentation. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you for inviting me. Thank you
course.
for mentoring me along the way and how to present my work.
Oh my gosh, you're a wonderful presenter. Thank you all for joining us for this artist talk. This was Andrea Walker Cummings as a part of our programming for the Black Life as Subject Matter 2 exhibition. I'd also like to give another special thank you to curator Willis Bing Davis for putting together such a great exhibition, to the other participating artists, as well as to the Ohio Arts Council's board, the Ohio legislature, and the governor who support the OAC, this great space, and of course, Ohio artists. Thanks, everyone.